Good morning, my sisters and brothers in Christ. It is certainly a privilege to, to be sharing with you today, especially as we come to the end of our Black History Month celebration. I must give thanks to Reverend Susan Lewis, my colleague and friend, for this invitation to speak to you this morning, especially to reflect and to share my thoughts on Black History Month. Let me begin first by acknowledging that the Anglican Diocese was founded on the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. I want to acknowledge the continued presence of the Algonquins on this territory and also the people, other nations, Inuit and Métis who live here. As I said, it's wonderful to be speaking to you. And I trust that what I share to you will be meaningful. So I offer this short prayer. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing to you, O God, my Creator. My message today is drawn from a presentation delivered a few months ago by the Venerable Valerie Kerr, Archdeacon for Truth and Reconciliation, an Indigenous ministry. Archdeacon Kerr, who was the keynote speaker at a Diocesan Clergy Day, in her talk, she addressed issues surrounding the Indigenous peoples of Canada. She shared that communicating truth is not always readily received and that there's always some level of pushback. And when I speak about pushback, it's responses such as, why can't we just move on? We have been at this for years. It's time to move on. D'Angelo, in his book, White Fragility, describes this pushback in this way. He says, when we try to talk openly and honestly about difficult subjects such as racism, white fragility emerges as we are met with silence, defensiveness, argumentation, and other forms of pushback. Pushback, again, are those responses that prevent us from attaining the racial knowledge we need to engage in to be more productive in our relationship building. So today I invite you to embark on a short journey with me, a journey of knowledge sharing, a journey in cases probably for reflection. I will share information that maybe you already know, but I trust that it will stimulate the opportunity for further productive engagement as we share together about Black history. And so let me talk a little bit about why this month is called Black History Month. For many of us, especially Blacks, the role of Blacks in Canada has not always been viewed as a key feature in Canada's historic landscape. Black history dates back to 1926, and it did not begin here in Canada. It began in America when an African American educator, Carter G. Woodson, proposed setting aside a week to honor the accomplishments of African Americans. And that week was known as African Heritage Week. Canada piggybacked on that shortly after. And it wasn't until in 1970 when that week in Canada became known as Black History Week. It was later expanded to Black History Month in 1976. But even though that verbal acknowledgement existed, it wasn't until in 1995 that the House of Commons officially recognized February as Black History Month in Canada, following a motion introduced by the Honorable Jean Augustine, MP. Later in February 2008, Senator Oliver introduced the motion in Parliament, and that completed that position on Black History Month. And so it became official in Parliament. Thereafter, the task of building relationships to get to know the stories of people of African descent began. And so, like the indigenous peoples of this country, whose voices were once silenced, voices were now audible, and story sharing began. And not only did that story sharing take place, but fostering of relationships also emerged. And so, more importantly, we hear the stories of those ordinary and extraordinary people who were responsible for shaping this nation of Canada. And so, that being said, Black History Month is about commemorating events that are integral to Canada's history and to our sense of identity. Over the years, there were several themes. The theme this year is our Canadian story, claiming our space. And this emerges out of the Decade of the People of African Descent. The theme draws on the General Assembly Proclamation of 2015 and 2025, citing the need to strengthen national, regional, and international cooperation in relation to economic, social, cultural, civil, and political rights of people of African descent, and their participation in every aspect of Canadian society. And I must share this. You may not be aware of this, or you may already be aware of it, but there's little mention of the fact that slavery existed in the territory that is now Canada, or that many of the loyalists who came here after the American Revolution and settled in the Maritimes were Black. Canadians are still unaware, in many cases, of the many sacrifices made in wartime by Black Canadian soldiers. as far back as the War of 1812. From 1800 to 1865, approximately 20,000 African Americans escaped to Canada through the Underground Railroad. And I know this aspect of our history is well known. The Underground Railroad and its details have been told over and over, but there are other aspects that have not been highlighted as much. Permit me to briefly share some highlights of contributions of Black people in all aspects of the Canadian mosaic. And let me ask, did you know of Marie-Josée Angelique and the fact that she represents the untold story of Canadian slavery and the burning of Old Montreal? Today, the public square across from Montreal City Hall carries the name Place Marie-Josée Angelique in her honor. I personally, when I shared the story of Marie-Josée, was greeted with total disdain, as the individual I shared the story with, in no uncertain terms, told me that Canada did not engage in slavery. And so that was, again, one of those pushbacks where he totally could not accept that the Canada that we have known as the place of always being the rescue and always endearing to everyone, that there was slavery here. I want to share also about Matthew da Costa, a fascinating figure in our early Canadian history. Matthew da Costa was a translator and qualifies as the first Black person known to have visited Canada in the early 1600s. He was a translator and could speak French, Dutch, and English, and Portuguese. Do you know the story of Viola Desmond? Viola, who is now recognized as the first Black person on Canadian currency, was one who stood her grounds when she purchased a ticket to a movie theater and was asked to move from the location that she purchased the ticket for into a non-white location. And Desmond refused and was charged. And there are several others that I would love to be able to spend the time to highlight. But since time does not permit us to explore all of these individuals and their stories, I encourage you to take some time to explore the available resources and to get to know some of this rich history being uncovered. Each year we are introduced to Black Canadians from all walks of life who have and continue to contribute greatly to our country. When we think of Black history and we think of ourselves as people of God, we are challenged and reminded that to move forward in true relationship as people of God, we must create intentional ways of becoming familiar with each other's story. Because the worldview of the Christ and in the reign of God, all of our destinies, all of our thrivings and surviving are interconnected. And in the spirit of Ubuntu, Dr. King puts it this way: I can't be fully who I am until you become fully who you are meant to be. We are woven together in a garment of destiny. Black and brown folks surviving is your surviving. It's all of our surviving. Black and brown folks' excellence, their discoveries, scientific or other, their joys and yes, their griefs belong to us as well. They belong to you as well. Our communities, our world is impoverished when we do not look at each other's stories and understand the links between them. And we cannot talk about Black history without talking about also that negative aspect of white rage and the ways it has affected all people of color and all religious minorities. We have to talk about what it means to be a blessing for all of us to be lifted up, to have joy, to have peace, to have love. What it means for us to take responsibility for each other's lives and each other's livelihood. And what is most important is the recognition of what this means to our children. Children need to know our story. All of the parents, the uncles, the aunties, Black, white, Asian, Indigenous, leaders, teachers, all of us must understand that our children are watching us. Know that they are taking inside of themselves how we view the world, what we say about the world, and what we say about people in this world we are viewing. They will take in the hatred, they will take in the dissing, they will take in the criticism, and they, our young ones, our babies, rather than building a world of hope and joy and peace, will enact the hate, will enact the violence, will enact racism that we stick in them, that we pour into them. If we are going to take Jesus seriously, if we are going to own that we are loving followers of the way of Christ, then in the name of Christ, we must be students of our story. The Black story, the Indigenous story. And not as an act of history or sociology, but as an act of our faith as our godly work to do. Both the Old Testament and the Gospel texts today speaks to us of transformation. Transformation that results from the encounter with a loving God. Though this transformation is mainly about Jesus, it invites us to claim transfiguration for this life we have now and here. Now, as we deepen our relationship with God. In the text, both Moses and Jesus are transfigured into vessels filled with God's glory, filled with love and grace. Moses' connection with God was evident as he exhumed it, as he connected with his community, as he reflected this glow, this light, whenever he was in the presence of God. The text tells us that Moses' encounter with God was very visible and empowering, not only for him, but for the community he served. Similarly, Jesus' transfiguration also served as hope for the disciples who were watching and who experienced it. They will have that experience and the memory of that experience as they journey in the days and weeks that were to follow. Those difficult days leading to the cross and the crucifixion of Christ. His transfigured presence will be to them a light to get them through those dark days. They will witness a Jesus who continues to be the peacekeeper, even in adverse situations. An example that would be expected, an example that they would have to embrace. And this is the transformed way that we are invited to embrace, knowing that in God, all things are possible. The psalmist in today's text also speaks of a God of peace, a God of justice, a God of equity. Almighty King, lover of justice, it says, you have established equity. Lord or God, ruler of the universe, you love what is right. All of these are possible through relationship with God. Moses came down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the covenant, bearing the 10 commandments. These commandments, in summary, become for us part of our affirmation of faith. So even as it was an affirmation for the people of Israel, it is for us today. And that summary says, "Hear, O Israel." And it invites us to love God and to love our neighbor as ourselves. Alice Walker summarizes this beautifully in a series of beatitudes that she expresses this way. Helped, she says, are those who hate their own racism, for they will dismantle systems of oppression. Helped are those who understand that their privilege wounded others. Helped are those who stand up and reach out and connect across bridges to make connections. Helped are those who recognize that they are not blessed when anyone else suffers. Helped are those who take up a mantle of making God's way on earth helped, and loved are we who will do this work of transforming and changing systems together. This work that says Black Lives Matter. This work that says the moral arc of this universe was built on the sacrifice of Black and brown caregivers, house cleaners, railroad builders, young and old, those gathered in church, those gathered in workplaces, wherever they were. This work that Viola Desmond demonstrated when she took a stand of where she was going to sit in the movie theater. This work that involved Angelique taking a stand for her freedom. This work that says it takes all of us to bring about change. May we also be transformed in ways that allows us to engage in this work, this transforming work, this work of love, this work of change, and this work that invites us to work as a community, to work as a collective body, bringing about God's way for each and every one of God's creation. Amen.